Okay, guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna love it.
Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith is the third and final part of the prequel trilogy, giving us the story everyone's sort of been waiting for since the prequels were announced, and that's the transformation of Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader. And this is the film we get to see that, the proper transition, whereas previously with the other two prequels, they've been very much just build up to that and a lot of just setting the work in place, but this is sort of the final payoff. And speaking of the other two, they weren't perceived the best at the time, and I think it's pretty much universally agreed that this is definitely the best of the prequels. It fixes a lot of issues from the previous two. It still has hints of those issues, but overall this is a much more solid film in sort of every single aspect compared to the other two. You can tell just from the film's opening how much the creators have taken on board and how they've tried to change it based on feedback they've got. You instantly see the CGI is much better. You can tell, it was somewhat ready to use now, because it looks amazing to this day, just the opening sequence of them flying over Coruscant. But also just the dialogue and acting's a lot better. You really get the sense of that Anakin and Obi-Wan have been through a war together, even though we don't see it on screen. Somewhat shows us through how they treat each other now, and it shows us that sort of change and evolution in the characters, in brief interactions between the two, sort of whilst they fly in. And that's great stuff. It sometimes could feel, I think especially if you've just watched the films and you haven't seen sort of the Clone Wars TV show, there's maybe a part missing because, the last time we saw Anakin, he was sort of a bit whiny and, a bit annoying.
I hate them!
And you can see he's really matured here. It's such a good way of showing, he's been through a war and, him and Obi-Wan's bond now is less sort of Obi-Wan sort of nagging on him, and they definitely are much more like brothers than Obi-Wan trying to play like a father type figure. And I think that's really great stuff. There's a lot of storytelling there without us sort of being shown it, and I know the rule is show don't tell, but it doesn't tell us, it still shows it, but not directly, if you get what I mean. Like, a great visual metaphor is just Anakin's scar. That shows he has grown up and he's been through stuff. And, we get onto the ship and they encounter Count Dooku, and again you can see how Obi-Wan and Anakin, they've definitely fought together. There is that story between the films there, and they are very much more like friends now, and it harkens back to sort of the original, A New Hope, where he says he was a good friend. You get the sense that they are good friends in this film, and they do really get along and trust each other. That's even more sort of pointed out when they fight in Dooku. They work together this time instead of sort of Anakin being arrogant and brash and just sort of running in. He's much calmer now, he's much more like a Jedi. And we get a great fight with them and Dooku, and the film's only about 15 minutes in, and it feels like we're getting the story like straight away, like you're straight into it, and I really like that. There's not a lot of issues with pacing, like whereas you could look at the previous two prequels films where there's times where it's somewhat uninteresting, you want something to happen. But yeah, the fight's pretty good, the choreography is great, and we get Obi-Wan knocked out and we get Anakin fighting Dooku on his own, and you can really see how much he has improved. He's going toe to toe with a person that was, completely obliterated him last time, and you can really see how he has learned from that mistake, and he's not as arrogant as he used to be. Again, he's more of an adult, and that gives him sort of the victory over Dooku. And by the way, if I hadn't mentioned, they're trying to save Palpatine here. And, we know as the audience that Palpatine is the Emperor out the originals because it's the same actor. But, we get the hint of him being the Emperor most in this one, obviously. And this is sort of the first hint when he tells him to kill Dooku.
Kill him. Kill him now. Do it.
And Anakin does it, and I think that's honestly sort of a great moment because it shows the split between Anakin. He's devoted to the Jedi, but he also sees Palpatine as kind of this father figure that, Qui-Gon Jinn would have probably been if he hadn't died. And that's great as it essentially sets up Anakin's inner conflict throughout this film. And I like how he sort of instantly regrets it. It shows Anakin is very much still good at this point, but can be manipulated. And I think that's a great point because it makes his change in this film that much more tragic, because there is a good person there somewhat, who is following sort of the Jedi's teachings. I do think it's a shame though that Dooku dies. Grievous. You know, it's cool him getting his head chopped off. You know, I like the brutality of that. But, you know, we don't get a lot of Christopher Lee, and I think that's a bit of a shame. You know, he's not in Attack of the Clones a whole bunch, and he's gone, like, super quick in this film. Like, by the end of it, you forget he were even in it. And he's sort of replaced with General Grievous as sort of the separatist villain. But this film, you know, it isn't so much focused on the separatists as villains this time. It clearly shows them as just sort of a pawn in Palpatine's game. And General Grievous, you know, I like General Grievous. He's so much better in sort of the Clone Wars. He gets fleshed out a lot more, and you know, you get to see him a lot more. And he just sort of comes out of nowhere in this film, which I think is a bit of a shame. I always feel that they should have introduced him in Attack of the Clones, even if it was just brief, just so there's that sense that he's actually been there. Like, you know, you get the sense that him and Obi-Wan have met a few times, but that's kind of it. You know, we haven't seen that, and you just feel a bit random. But for me personally, you know, seeing the Clone Wars and stuff, you know, I've always known it with that show. So to me, I'm like, oh, Grievous, you know what I mean? And then we get a bit of a fight there, and, you know, them landing back on Coruscant. And that whole opening is pretty great. It tells us so much story in such a way that isn't, you know, just exposition. You know, it's through visuals, just character interactions. It tells us so much. And that scene pretty much encapsulates how they've improved on the previous two. You know, the CGI, the acting, the dialogue, even the choreography and like with Dooku and stuff is great. You know, it's such a great opener. We then sort of catch up with what's going on with Anakin and Padme, and you find out she's pregnant, and you're like, oh, you know, Luke and Leia, if you know the story or whatever. And I'd say the only negative is that Padme doesn't do a whole lot in this film. She's kind of just Anakin's wife, whereas in the other film she was quite involved. Not so much in this one, but it's not a problem. Like, they couldn't have done it any other way, and I'm glad that she had time to shine in the other two. You know, she didn't just feel like Anakin's wife overall, because we've had that previous setup of character. And then we get Anakin sort of having nightmares about her dying in childbirth. And, you know, it harkens back to sort of episode 2 where he had visions of his mother dying and he didn't really act on it. And she did die. So you can very much understand Anakin's internal conflict with this. You know, he's been through it before, and it's, you know, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So that parallel is really great as sort of a driving force behind his character. And I like how this film takes on a much more complex plot. You know, Palpatine's plan and strategy is honestly genius. And I think the other two films have done a great job setting it up, where you don't really know what the payoffs are going to be. You know, we don't know particularly how the Empire came from the Republic based on the originals. And it's honestly great, sort of the plan he sets up. And I like the idea, you know, the Jedi aren't completely stupid. They get Anakin to spy on Palpatine. And I like the idea of they won't give him the Jedi Master rank.
What?
Because he is so young. And, you know, it instantly shows why he shouldn't have it, because his response to it is somewhat in arrogance. But you can understand where he's coming from, especially if you have seen the Clone Wars, seeing sort of everything he's done in the war effort. You understand his frustration with not being treated with sort of the respect he feels he deserves. But again, it sort of sows that mistrust into the Jedi. Anakin's allegiance is very much in question in this. You know, he's not completely with Palpatine either. And I like how the Jedi, you know, say the dark side of the Force surrounds Palpatine. I've always interpreted that as they don't necessarily think he's a Sith Lord, but maybe he's under the influence of one. That's why it's so shocking when he is proved to be one. You get what I mean by that? Like, I know some people might think, well, they knew, so why didn't they do anything? But to me, that's always what they've been saying there and thinking. And we get the scene where Anakin visits Palpatine, where he's watching that weird water opera thing. And that's pretty great. You know, we get Palpatine pulling the strings of Anakin and sort of sewing ideas into his head. And this really shows how much trust Anakin has in Palpatine, because, you know, he somewhat knows him inside out, and he's told him events that we've seen as the audience. And you can see he somewhat sees him as a fatherly figure. And when he's playing into the idea of he knows Anakin fears for Padme's life, it's so great because it somewhat puts him in a position of desperation. And it shows why Palpatine is such a good villain. You know, he's super manipulative. To me, that's always been his, like, true power. And when he's explaining how he killed his mentor, Palpatine, you know, he don't say it's him, but he's heavily implying it to Anakin, and Anakin's sort of a bit dumb. And, you know, he's saying he could save those he loved, but not himself. And he could manipulate the midichlorians to create life. To me, that's always seemed like Palpatine's just talking shit. You know, he's saying what Anakin wants to hear. And I know there's comics and stuff like that saying like how Anakin was born and stuff, but I think he's just saying that so it feels like Anakin's somewhat connected, and you know, it is believable when he's saying midichlorians can create life, but also how he could save his loved ones. I've always interpreted that as maybe he just had foresight like Anakin did, you know, and he could somewhat stop events, but he didn't have one for himself dying. And I like the idea of just Palpatine is just, you know, lying. You know, he sees potential in Anakin's power, and maybe they could figure out the concept of how to become immortal and invincible. But in reality, that's never happened. Personally, I like that idea a lot better. You know, there's probably, like I said, there's comics and stuff explaining, like, or certain reasons and stuff. But if we're just looking at the films, you know, to me, it's way better Palpatine just somewhat lying and bending the truth to get Anakin on his side. We even see that he's somewhat lied later on. You know, when he's saying, oh, you and me together can figure it out, where he was previously saying, I can teach you. You know, you get what I'm saying there. I much prefer the idea of just him lying. And Obi-Wan gets sent off to go after Grievous, and it's sort of the last interaction him and Anakin have together. And you can see they're really on good terms, and it makes that final fight a lot more impactful because the last time they saw each other they were good friends, and what's happened individually to themselves by when they were by themselves has really warped the views of each other. So Obi-Wan goes after Grievous on Utapau, and a new planet we haven't seen before, which is alright, it's kind of looks okay. I think Kashyyyk is a much cooler idea for a new planet, which is the Wookiee home planet, which Yoda goes to in this film. But back onto Obi-Wan and Grievous. The fight's pretty good. You know, I wish the lightsaber portion of the fight lasted a little bit longer. It's literally like 2 minutes of Grievous sort of swizzling his lightsabers around and Obi-Wan just chopping his hands off. Then it gets into this sort of chase and then sort of this brawling type bit. I like the different sections of the fight, but I wish sort of each one of them was elongated. The fight feels very brief, and then Grievous is just killed off, and he's just sort of a lackey, you know, he's a glorified henchman, Grievous. And I guess that's what he is to Palpatine, you know what I mean? So it somewhat works in that regard. But yeah, the fight overall is pretty good. You know, especially the brawling bit at the end, I think that's the best part, where you see Obi-Wan somewhat having to think on his feet. I quite like that, because as a Jedi, they normally use the lightsabers. And, you know, when he kicks his leg, that's a great bit where he, like, breaks his shin. And then he has to use a blaster at the end as well. I think that's great. It somewhat shows Obi-Wan as a great survivalist. And obviously, you know, he survived so long after this film. I don't know if that is a hint to that, but I'd like to think it is.
Army or not, you must realize you are doomed.
Oh, I don't think so.
Back to Coruscant with Anakin's sort of plot. You know, he confronts Palpatine and he exposes that he's a Sith Lord. And at this point it shows, you know, Anakin is very much still split. He goes to Mace Windu to get his help and say, you know, he's the Sith Lord or whatever.
A Sith Lord?
Yes.
A Sith Lord?
Yes.
A Sith Lord?
Yes.
A Sith...
And Mace Windu tells him to stay, and that somewhat infuriates him, but it's honestly understandable, and you get why, especially after this fight. And we get sort of the moment where he's in the Jedi chambers and him and Padme are both looking at the sky, and, you know, it's somewhat of a silent exchange, even though personally to me they're not speaking to each other or looking at each other like some people think. They're just thinking of each other. I think that's pretty obvious. And in that moment, Anakin's conflict sort of erupts and he rushes over there, and I like the idea of he doesn't really know what he's going to do but feels the need to do something, and I quite like that, and I think this scene does a great job of getting across that. Well, now onto the Mace Windu and Palpatine fight. This scene alone is like the holy grail of prequel memes.
Master Windu.
Are you threatening me, Master Jedi? I am the Senate.
Not yet.
It's treason, then.
The Jedi are taking over.
No. 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 You are not.
Don't let him kill me. I'm too weak. Oh, don't kill me, please. Please don't.
I need him!
Please don't. Don't.
There's so much stuff that is absolutely hilarious when it shouldn't be here, but that makes me honestly love it even more. And Mace Windu goes with 3 other boys, but they're pretty useless. And then we get sort of the one-on-one, the actual fight with Mace Windu and Palpatine. I don't mind it. I know a few people have issues, like Palpatine's pulling some pretty funny faces at some points, which are a bit stupid, and it's not the best choreographed, and we have that weird CGI bit where he's like jumping off that chair or whatever it is. But you know, I like that bit where the glass shatters and stuff like that. So overall, it's not an amazing fight, but it's not terrible. It's fine. And like I said, it's worth it just for the memes. And then we get Anakin rocking up, and we get Palpatine electrocuting himself, and he gets all disfigured, and you know that Sith corruption comes out, and we see somewhat how much of a monster he is in a visual sense. And when Mace Windu says he's going to kill him, I love the moment sort of Anakin somewhat processes back to the beginning, and at this point he's been very much stretched between being with the Jedi and being with Palpatine. But at that point they're the same thing, you know, they're acting the same in a similar situation. So to Anakin, in like a split decision, which he pretty much immediately regrets,
What have I done?
he goes for the side where it's going to save Padme. And I love that. And he chops off Mace Windu's hand, and then Mace Windu gets unlimited powered out the window. And for people who think Mace Windu's still alive, he's not. And if he is, that's just dumb. The guy's dead. And then we get Anakin somewhat being regretful, but Palpatine manages to convince him sort of why he did it. And then he somewhat shuts it out, and he's just focusing on why he did do it, and that's for Padme. And, you know, this is the moment he becomes Darth Vader, and a few people have a problem with this. Personally, I quite like it. This entire film has been Anakin sort of stretched between the Jedi and Palpatine, and I like to think of it more like a rubber band, where, you know, it's been stretched and stretched and stretched, and on a macroscopic level, it's being damaged, but to us visually it isn't, and we only really see the damage once it snaps. And this is the moment it does snap, and the side that's hold of the band is Palpatine. So anybody that's like, oh, well, now he goes to kill all the Jedi, he's done it. You know, he's past the threshold where he can turn back. He's sort of in it now. But something that always makes me laugh about that scene, just Palpatine's voice is so weird. It goes like robotic for some reason, and it's not like that in any other thing he's ever been in.
Henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Vader.
This is the end of part 1 of the review. The second part will go up soon, so see you there.